All right, welcome to the Teach Coach Mentor podcast. Today I have PJ, and I should have asked how to pronounce your last name. Milani? Am I saying
Milani, that's it. Right
Oh
on.
man, well,
Like Milana Tucci, but with an I. There you go.
you only said that 1,000 times, I'm sure, but really excited to have you on here. You don't really need an introduction, I don't think, because
Probably do.
uh, I'm a massive fan, so I'm kind of fanning out right now. But you have a huge following for creatives that you make online, and these are metaphors, pictures, visuals that you have taken from, say, an aphorism, a piece of advice, a statement that we've all maybe heard 1,000 times, but you've converted it very creatively into these amazing visuals that tell the full story in simple and yet really fascinating pictures. And so, first of all, welcome. And I want to start a little bit with just your background, because you're a teacher, which is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to have you on here. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what you taught and how you got into this space and the arc of your journey here in a few minutes.
Well, thank you. First off, happy to be here. I was really excited when you said that you work with teachers and you're in this space of teachers, because teachers are my favorite people. And yeah, I've been a teacher going on 23 years. So I'm a film and animation teacher by day. And this one sec, my son is not maybe in like an hour. Okay. Sorry. This is apology. Well, I don't know if that'll stay in the
It's up to you. In post, or you can just leave in and say, "This is part of life."
What? Yeah, it's part of life. In any case, yeah. So I'm in my 23rd year teaching film and animation, and I still teach. I don't plan on not teaching, but about 4 years ago, roughly, I stumbled my way into what you mentioned earlier, which are these visual metaphors. I initially remember going to my wife, and I had this like buzz for years in the back of my mind, like, because I've been teaching creative arts for, again, over 20 years. And I just had this like buzz in the back of my mind constantly. And some of it is from my students, because they're always asking me, like, what are you working on? Like, what are you working on? Because I teach them like how to be creative. I teach them filmmaking. I teach them animation and all these different like approaches to being a creative soul. But, they're all like, what are you creating? And I'm kind of like, I got nothing left at the end of the day. I got nothing left in the tank. All the juice has been squeezed, and the gold. Yeah, even though I'm working on like thousands of projects over the years with kids, I wasn't really making anything for myself. And I felt like this nagging sense that I really needed to. And part of it was, as things have been changing in the space in film and in animation and just like creativity in general, I felt like I needed to connect to the process a little bit more hands-on. And I wasn't really sure what shape that would take, but it was something that I'd been meaning and wanting to do for years and years and years and years. And then the pandemic hits. Yeah. And you're like, oh my God, I really don't like teaching in this way. And I was like, oh my God, what if this never stops? What if this never stops? What if like this is life now, and this is what teaching looks like? And it was really like jarring to my identity, because everything up to that point was like, I'm a teacher. But then I was like, oh no, what if I can't teach?
Yeah.
And so, I was journaling about this, and I was like, okay, maybe now it's time. I need to start doing something for myself, blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, gosh, dang it. I felt like, oh my God, I had this like deja vu feeling. So I started looking through journals from years and years ago, and I found that I had written something very similar, like 10, 11 years before.
Yeah.
And it was around the same time. It was like around my birthday. And like I had written it again around my birthday. And I was like, holy crap, like either I do something about this.
Right.
Because I've been saying the same thing year after year after year, or I just say, okay, you know what? Maybe that's just not in my genes. Maybe it's just not in the path I'm taking. And that's fine too. But I was like, I needed to make a decision. Either I take the leap or I don't. And so I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to do something. So I go up to my wife and try to break the news to her. This is something I'm thinking about doing. We have 2 kids. So I was like, okay, I think I'm going to start a blog. She's like, wait, what? She's like, do people still read blogs? Like, I was like, I mean, I do. But I'm kind of a goofball nerd that way. But
Yeah.
for some reason, that was in my head. Like, this is what I'm going to start doing, is like writing online. And so I started the blog. I didn't really tell anybody. And of course, as you might imagine, I wasn't on social media. I hated social media, like crickets, like nothing. I was expecting like at the end of the month, at least like I would start seeing some traffic. Nothing.
Right.
And for obvious reasons, like if you put a message in a bottle and you throw it out into the ocean, but there's like billions of other bottles, like how the hell is anyone going to find your message? So I was like, okay, I guess I got to do something on social media. So I started writing on Twitter. Again, no following at all. Didn't tell anyone. Started out with like 3 followers. One was a student who just happened to run into me, a former student, an alum, and was like, oh, I'm on Twitter. And I was telling him about this, and he was like, oh man, I'm gonna follow you. I was like, no, you don't have to. He's like, no, I'm gonna follow you. Okay, there's like one, and another one just like happened to find me, and like the third one was like just follow back kind of thing. And so I started with 3 followers, started writing, and eventually I started seeing these visuals by Jack Butcher. Was probably the first person I saw doing these things, which is these like very minimalist visuals. And I was like, I have this like history of like spending a lot of time on presentations. I'm like my slides and my presentations, like almost, to the point where it's not a good idea to spend that much time on a presentation slide. And I like studied this old style of, I don't even know if it's an older style, but it's a presentation style called pechakucha. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Have you ever heard of pechakucha? It's like a Japanese approach. It's a Japanese thing. It's like you make 20 slides and you have 20 seconds each. And so you have a very short amount of time to be able to deliver a message, like your whole lesson, essentially. And so you have 20 seconds, 20 slides. And so I spent like 16 hours, 20 hours on one presentation. Right. And I was like, this is so inefficient.
Yeah.
This is like so much time. But when I delivered it, it was so effective. And I was like, okay, efficiency doesn't equal efficacy. And so, I had this history of like spending way too much time on like single slides. And I was like, well, why don't I just like use the metaphors I might use in a classroom and just put it out into the world at the same time? So I'm doing this anyway, to some degree. And so I started doing that. Just single slides, very similar to what Jack Butcher was doing. Another person, Yanis Oslins, was also doing the same thing. And there were some other people who were doing the same thing. And it just started to get some attention. And I was like, oh my gosh, whoa, okay, there's something here. And I remember the first visual that I made that took off was this one on management versus leadership. It was like a boat and a lighthouse. And I got more attention on that than I had followers at the time. And it was like, oh, this actually is something. Right. And it wasn't by any means easy, and it wasn't by any means obvious that this thing was something, but I kind of kept at it. And there was definitely, and I wrote about this very recently on LinkedIn. There was a moment, I remember this one day waking up and thinking, how am I doing, man? Like I'm spending all this time, I'm spending all this effort. I don't love being on social media.
Yeah.
But I'm putting in all of myself into this thing. And it is not without cost and trade-off, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I need to just like say, I gave it a shot. I give this whole online thing a shot, and just let me maybe just focus on the classroom now. literally that same exact day when I opened up Twitter, Adam Grant had reposted one of my visuals on writing and thinking. And I was like, my mind like exploded. I had to like triple check it was the real Adam Grant, and I like was like, is there another Adam Grant? Somebody like hack his account, and I shot him a message, and he was as cool as he is on podcasts. And as you might imagine, he's very gracious and very, I was just honored that he thought that something I made was like meaningful enough to share. And he wrote me this beautiful testimonial, and it was just it was almost like, it felt like a sign, if you're into that kind of thing. And it was just what I needed at the right time to keep going.
Yeah.
And then just fast forward, continuing, like those kinds of moments happened regularly at points where I was like, is this something I should really keep doing? And then something else would happen. And so, fast forward at this point, the main goal that I've kind of had throughout this whole process is, and this is something that might resonate with your listeners, is that there was always like this feeling that there's more out there, that I should be doing more. And I think you have to be careful about that, because sometimes that feeling will never go away especially if that feeling comes from an external source. Right. I recognized, because I did a lot of journaling over time, that feeling came from an internal source. Like I felt like I needed to be doing more in order to be a better teacher, in order to be able to feel I was in alignment with what I was doing in the classroom. I really bristle at the idea when people say, oh, what are you doing for your side hustle? I'm like, one, it's not a hustle. I'm not trying to hustle anyone out about anything. Two, I am hustling on my own time, but I don't like to think of it as a side hustle. I like to think of it as in alignment with, I'm not doing like something so far off to the side of what I'm doing in the classroom. I like to think of them as they were in sync. And so the fact that I was able to find something that fed into that, it was like, what I'm hoping is that it continues to feed this creative itch. And what I really hope to do online is to encourage other people to take up some kind of creative practice, it doesn't have to be in visuals. It could be just this podcast like you're doing now. It feeds something in you to be able to just somehow express or communicate in a way that reaches and impacts other people to find what's meaningful and fulfilling to them. And I think if you can just find some thread, and you do that in the classroom, but if you can find something that feeds you as well, you show up in the classroom differently. Yeah. And so anyway, that's a word vomit of a story, but that's kind of where I started and where I'm currently am.
No, it's a great story. I do appreciate you going through the detail. I think sometimes, especially with social media, we just skip through the hard parts. We skip through the challenges and go right to success, or, you get one snippet of challenge and that was it. And no, it's like really the series of challenges that you have to kind of constantly overcome, and these series of self-doubts that we all go through no matter what stage we're at. I really like, though, how you talked about, we use this phrase side hustle, but for you, this is really very well integrated with your work and your life and your passion and your hobby and all the words that might describe your creative endeavors. And this podcast very much for me is a passion project. It started as part of a business like we talked about before the show. And now it's not part of a business at all. I just do it because I really love interesting people and interesting conversations. And I've gotten to meet folks like you and that I never would have in any other medium or context. And it's really so much fun. There's a parable. It's like this short story of a bricklayer. Maybe a story is too strong a word, but when we're talking about having a job or having a career and then really putting meaning and passion to your life, there was always this great little short story about the bricklayer where you would have three bricklayers who are building something, and you'd ask the first one what he's doing, and he might say, "Oh, I'm I'm earning money. I have a job. I get paid $15 an hour. I'm laying bricks. And then you ask the second person what they're doing, and they'll tell you that they're constructing a building, and that, that's integral to their identity. They are a building maker. They just happen to be laying bricks. And then you ask the third person what they're doing. And for those that might be religious, they could connect with this, which is, I'm building a house of God, right? Which is that this person, you've gone from, I need to make money, which we all need to sustain and support ourselves and our families, to an integral identity of your life. This is kind of what I do. And I've built a career out of this, to that final stage, which I think is what you're alluding to, which is, I serve other people through this greater purpose. And that is how that third person was viewing themselves. And we don't all make it to that third stage, I don't think. Sometimes it's difficult, but it sounds like, to me, that's maybe what you were articulating there, where this isn't a side hustle, right? You're not in the money stage. You have a career as a teacher. So you've now really kind of fully integrated your during work and after work activities through the same creative passion. I don't know if I captured that right, but that's kind of what it sounded like to me.
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, it's finding a thread and holding on to that thread and building on it to continue to potentially build something even more. And it's what's interesting is all three of those bricklayers are doing the same thing, but showing up differently and feeling differently as they do it. Like,
right.
One of the things I am regularly trying to check in with myself on is being present as I'm doing the thing. Like, one of the things I've recognized, like, I sometimes fall into the trap of, and I don't know if you would resonate with this, but is this falling into this milestone, being almost like a milestone junkie to some degree, where it's like you only see, it's like, especially if you're a teacher, like you have an additional temporal milestone that other people don't have, that regularly kind of puts you in this, if I get to this next thing, then things will be easier. One of my friends, Justin Moore, he recently said something in a workshop that I really liked. He said that he was having a conversation with one of his business coaches, and he's like, his business coach said, look, there are no corners in life, which basically is, you're never going to get around a corner and then just be smooth sailing. Like, everything is curving. And if you can just find a way to just put your hands up and enjoy the ride as you're doing the thing, that is man, that is the magic. And it's not easy, and it's not something you'll hit every day, but that's an aspiration that I try to do. And I think finding that purpose, finding that thread that makes you feel like I'm part of something bigger. Right. And it can be really anything. And it can be arbitrary. It's just a belief. You can do it without any external forces. But if you can find it and you hold on to it and just, like a little spark, and you just kind of go try to make it into something bigger over time, then I think that's a really beautiful thing to hold on to.
It is. And for some of the younger folks that are listening, I would also maybe offer that it's okay to not have any clue at all what that thing will be.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
You'll experiment, go fail at 30 different things and figure it out along the way. And sometimes it presents itself early, and sometimes it takes a really long time. You actually have to build a skill first before you realize you have the passion. I think I've seen that more often than not when I've worked with young folks. I want to ask you specifically about your visual metaphors and the work that you've done. And we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but I was in kind of prep for the interview trying to figure out what makes you so special? What makes your drawing so special, right? There's lots of artists out there. There's lots of cartoonists. There's lots of drawings, and yet people have really resonated. I myself have resonated with what you've produced. And so I was just scrolling through LinkedIn. That's where I know you from. And I'm scrolling through LinkedIn, and I'm looking at all of these, trying to figure out what's the thread for me that pulls these things together. And what I kind of discovered is that there is the aha moment of connecting the lesson or the aphorism or the leadership principle with the visual. And every one of them is an aha moment where you go, yes, that's exactly how that should be drawn, even if I could not have decided that beforehand. And so I've made up a new term. You have an Aha-Ness factor
If you're,
your drawings,
I bet.
obviously can a lot of people connect with. So I don't know how you feel about that, and maybe if other folks have commented on something similar. But and I know it's difficult because you're the one creating these things. But what is it that makes these, these metaphors, these visual metaphors, different, and why do you think people connect with them so readily?
I think there's, first off, thank you for the kind words, and I like Aha-Ness factor. That's a nice way. And what's really neat is, so I teach a course called Thinking in Visual Metaphors, and one of the things this is not for my high school students, this is for adults. And one of the things that we talk about is the different reactions that audiences might have to the work that you share with them. And the Holy Grail is the aha, like a wow factor. So if you can reach that, then that's the Holy Grail, that's the aspiration. So it's wonderful to hear that some of them have hit that aha, resonance for you. But yeah, I mean, I think what I try to do, number one is like once you start to see the world in a very specific way, you can't stop seeing it that way. Once those doors are open, you are aware a little bit to a different attunement that may seem like it's magic, but it's not. It's just a different lens that you get to see the world in. And there's a really cool phenomenon called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, which is like a really fancy way to say selective attention bias. And basically you use that to your advantage, which is, selective attention bias, if you're not familiar, it's like, okay, you buy a red Volkswagen, you start to see red Volkswagens everywhere. Even if there aren't any more red Volkswagens, it's just that you've attuned your attention to seeing more red Volkswagens. When you start to like see the world through how things connect to each other, you start to see connections everywhere. And it's not magic. It's just like you just open up a few doors and you start to rub neurons a little bit more together. Like you start to see things differently.
Yeah.
So the thing that the real kind of maybe more tactical thing that I'm doing is trying to find something familiar to connect the unfamiliar with. And you're using some kind of relational bridge. In this case, it's a metaphor. And I think, as a teacher, most people confuse instruction with teaching. And I think instruction is just a part of teaching. It's not the only part of teaching.
Yeah.
But I think anyone who's been teaching for a while knows that the two best vehicles to deliver some kind of insight is to use either stories or metaphors. I think those two are it. Those are like, I mean, there's probably more ways to communicate, but I feel like those two, through whatever subject you're trying to teach, whatever insight or whatever complexity you're trying to distill, those two approaches yield the most stickiness in the mind for your reader or your audience or your students. Okay. And so I find that if you can find something familiar and take that as your connective tissue for the unfamiliar, then you're able to really make something like sing in someone's brain. And you're like, oh my gosh, like it almost feels like, again, it part of it also is, part of what I'm at least aiming to do is I have like my specific approach is and this comes from filmmaking, is I don't want to be on the nose with the insight. And what I mean by that is, imagine the explanation of a metaphor as a circle. So like, imagine if me explaining an idea to you as me drawing a circle. What I'm trying to do is actually not complete the circle for you. I just leave a little bit of gap at the end of that circle. You still know there's a circle. Like you can still see most of the shape. I'm kind of walking you most of the way to the finish line, and you get to take that final step.
Yeah.
and you see the insight. It's like a very small tension, but it's enough tension. It's enough curiosity gap. I call it the curiosity gap. I'm sure it's used that's not the first time anyone's ever used that term, but that's the curiosity gap in that circle. Instead of, presenting the answer is 4, I give them 2 + 2. And you're like, oh my gosh, I got it. And you're like, yeah, you make your reader, your audience, your students feel smart by being able to take those final few steps. And but through that, I think that's what creates the aha. If I just tell you something, I'm not allowing you to make any recognition.
That's right.
Yeah, if I just tell you the answer, you're like, there's no aha there. But if you are somewhat active in that process, you are seeing the insight. And so it's not an easy, it's definitely a lot of trial and error. Like some visuals will miss, some visuals will hit. And I've made over 900 plus visual metaphors by now, and some of them missed completely, and that's okay. Like that's the whole goal. Like the goal is to, I love this bit from Jerry Seinfeld. If is this anything? There's a book he wrote. It's pretty much a stand-up comedy, and the book is called "Is This We." It's a great book. It's a fun book, but I love that book because the whole that pretty much sums it up. Like Jerry Seinfeld, if you know or are familiar with his work, his whole like it's something he can't even turn off, which is like he's always looking for bits.
That's right.
Like, does this work? Is this bit funny? And to some degree, once you immerse yourself in something like this, something like visual metaphors, and you're like, okay, is this anything? Will this work? Does this connect with you? Is what I'm giving what you're getting? That like uncertainty is actually a good thing, because that means that I'm trying something that I haven't tried. So I keep trying things that I haven't tried. Some of them hit, some of them miss. But yeah, I'm not always going to hit the aha, but I'm always trying to present it in a different way. And again, out of 900, maybe like 50 of them like really hit. And you just keep aiming, and that's part of the fun.
No, as far as I know, that fits squarely with all the research on education, on how we learn, is that there are desirable difficulties. And what I like in your setup here is that, it's a very difficult thing to optimize, right? How do I get I need you to work hard enough that it sticks in your brain. You have the aha moment. There's a connection. There's generally an emotion associated with it, which allows you or enables you to remember that thing longer. But I can't make it so difficult that you don't reach it, because if you don't reach it, you won't have the moment. It won't get stored. And that's essentially, I think, what you're talking about here with the circle metaphor, is you're getting them to that last step that they have to make on their own. If you've done that successfully, they have the aha moment and it really clicks. So you're kind of creating that little bit of a desirable difficulty right at the end, but not so much that they go, I don't get it, and they move on. Yes. I mean, that's an enormously difficult task of anything, whether it's a visual creative, whether it's teaching in the classroom. And if you've gotten 50 out of 900, man, that's just some hell of a success rate in my book. So, really, really nicely done there. One of the things I might want to ask you a little bit about more, if I could add on to the toolbox. So storytelling, we love storytelling. We're identifying patterns in knowledge, making logical connections. We're just storytelling animals. And then I love the metaphor, but could you maybe talk to the difference between a metaphor and an analogy? Because I've always tried to use analogies, and my favorite part of an analogy is where it breaks down. And I think that's as useful in learning something new as what makes it a like. And I had someone disagree with me on this once, and the example they used was hilarious. They said, well, there are some really bad analogies out there. Like, the sun is a giant sphere and it's yellow, yellowish orange, and an orange is a sphere. And, but that's a terrible analogy because they're nothing alike. And I said, no, you just told me two ways in which they were alike. And it's really important then. The next step is to say, and in no way else are they alike. Important too, because it'll the work you have left, it illuminates the rest of the branches that haven't connected to your kind of network of knowledge.
Yeah.
So how do metaphors and analogies differ for you? And Is there some aspect of your work that is like an analogy in that you're highlighting what something is not as much as you are what it is, if that makes sense?
It does. Out of curiosity, what do you see as the difference between a metaphor and an analogy?
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot. I'm a physics guy. I teach physics,
Yeah.
I think for me, a metaphor is okay. So an analogy is inherently the comparison of two dissimilar things and trying to find the connections that they share, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the essential essence of an analogy. And I like analogies because of the differences. That's usually as illuminating as what makes them the same. I can't give you the English definition of a metaphor, but typically in my mind, a metaphor is an entirely different way of seeing the same thing, not necessarily comparing two dissimilar things. I don't know if I've described that well enough, but that's how I would kind of off the cuff.
No, I was just curious because to me, I guess I don't necessarily, I mean, it's an interesting thought exercise, but in the work that I don't know if I've ever considered the value of what the difference is, because the whole point of a metaphor for me is that it serves the purpose of being a mental model to understand the thing. And right. It is true that every metaphor and every analogy, I mean, you could probably use the two interchangeably to some degree. And, I mean, there's an English definition to them, like that is very distinct. But for me, it really is not an important distinction because I'll use analogies as a reference for a metaphor. And it's just the first part of it. There's more to it.
Yeah.
And for me, at this point, I can't distinguish the difference between a visual metaphor and analogy. The visual part of it is such a strong part of it. So like, cause you can use analogies or rather metaphorical language, like, time is money, that kind of stuff where, we're wired, like these are metaphors that we're using to understand just everything, like how our brains work. When we use the computer metaphor, it limits our thinking. If we just say time is money, there's inherent connotations that come with that may or may not be useful. But I find that sometimes if we get too caught up in that, we lose the forest from the trees a little bit, because you need some kind of mental model to understand the unfamiliar in some way. And every metaphor that I've ever used breaks down at some point. Like the further you go, like if you've ever had a conversation and you start with a metaphor and then you really continue to use that metaphor and you start to realize, oh shit, okay, maybe I'm taking this metaphor too far. Like this is not holding up. Like that's actually kind of fun.
Yeah, no, to your point, metaphors are abstracted. I mean, they're abstracted views of something in a way that an analogy typically is not. It's more of a concrete statement about the similarities and differences between two processes or two things. And metaphors are harder to do, I think, and they're harder to get right for sure. And so maybe just as we kind of finish up here, I kind of want to go back to specifically your process in creating this thing. I totally understand and accept your point about once you see it, you can't unsee it. I think we've all been there. If you've learned some new economic principle, suddenly you just can't unsee that thing, whether it's in an academic space or a creative space. But I assume that there is still work involved. I'm interested in kind of as you're exploring the space of all possible metaphors, you have to make a lot of decisions about, okay, what am I going to try to create a visual metaphor of? Is it going to be a leadership topic? Is it a teaching topic? Is it a classic aphorism or some sort of moral statement that people make all the time, but don't think too much about, that you're interested in diving deeper on? So I guess maybe part one of my question is, how do you decide of all the possible topics to create visual metaphors, which ones to hone in on? And maybe that probably, if I had to guess, would speak to your passion in helping people and what you're trying to gain out of this. You're obviously not doing it to be social media famous, right? You're doing it because you're delivering something enjoyable and useful to people. And then the second piece of that is now it's time to actually create the thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm just kind of interested in your creative process in brainstorming different potential metaphors, how you decide which visual metaphor to go with. And then do you spend much time worrying about it, or is it launch and move on to the next one? I know I just gave you a lot to work with there, but
yeah, let's see if I can remember all three of these. Okay, so the first part is, okay, how do you choose
topic exploration? That's right.
How do you choose what to explore? And as a physicist, you might appreciate this. Feynman had his 12 favorite problems. Are you familiar with Feynman's 12 favorite problems
Yes.
approach? So Richard Feynman, one of the probably most prolific physicists out there, he had this approach to how he thinks about problems. When he was asked, like, how are you so freaking prolific? He's like, well, I'm always working on problems, just not directly. So what he does is he creates a list of 12 favorite problems that he's working on. And I think the key part in this is that you form a question in that problem. And, as human beings, whenever you ask a question, your brain has this Zeigarnik effect, which is another fancy word for, like, you want to complete it. And, your brain starts to actively try to answer that question. So you have a list of 12 problems, you form them in the form of a question, you have those, and you write those. I try to write ideas that I think would be interesting ideas to explore. And they're deep, difficult, and unanswerable questions oftentimes. Like, one of mine is like, how has friendship in my 20s changed with friendship in my 40s? That's a pretty difficult question to answer, but it gets me thinking. And so I'll front load some of these questions in my brain whenever I'm about to drive to work. I got a long drive to go into work, so I drive in silence. So that's my thinking time. So I'll front load maybe 3 to 4 of these questions in the morning and just go about my day. And then through that sheer act, which sounds really silly and simple, through the sheer act of just front loading something into your psyche, your brain is always trying to solve problems anyway. Why not be intentional about those problems that it tries to solve? So that's kind of how I might at least steer my thinking towards something that is something intentionally I'm trying to solve. Otherwise, sometimes ideas just hit you again, because you just through the sheer act of opening those doors, things are going to come in. And I have a very active capture process where anything that comes into my brain, I try to write it somewhere. It is not clean. I have lots of papers everywhere of ideas that are just constantly, I got notebooks upon notebooks, I got journals upon journals, and not to mention all the digital stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the process of, like, at least what I'm working on. Now, in terms of how you work on it, it's a pretty, there's a process to learning how to do it. But I think the one simplest takeaway that I can give that anyone can probably start to use almost instantly is to think in context, to think in terms of how can I put, and by saying think in context, what I'm saying is, if you look at the work that I do, it becomes very quickly obvious that what I'm doing is I'm presenting two ideas next to each other. Mm-hmm. And it is through those two ideas being next to each other that the context is delivered, because our brains are wired, metaphor there, wired to think in comparison. And, that's why we compare ourselves to others to base, where am I? We are thinking always in hierarchy. We're always thinking in comparisons. We're always thinking in this or that, whether we want to or not. So when I present an idea, I'm thinking this compared to this. And your brain makes those two associations, whether we want to or not. This is, again, goes back to my filmmaking days or film teaching, which is when you edit a film, what you place next to each other creates meaning. So it's not 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 3, because you're adding additional context. And that is something that, again, someone who's looking at your stuff is going to be able to figure out just because of the things next to each other. That's what creates the metaphor. And ideally, the context that is delivered in those is also somewhat contextually connected. Like the management versus leadership visual that I talked about earlier, which had a boat and a lighthouse. Contextually, they're both on the water. So it's not like I'm talking about two things that have nothing connected to each other. So I'm saying this is what like that is in this context. And this is using that same context, what this is. And that makes a pretty significant difference in just understanding for someone who's coming into it, like, okay, what are these two things trying to say? And so, I mean, again, there's a lot more that goes into it, but I think if you can think in terms of, you know, we're all like human beings are very like, we think in very nuanced ways a lot of times, even if, you know, sometimes what's presented to you is more binary. But I think when you are able to present two things next to each other, that simplifies the meaning tremendously enough that it is quick to understand what is trying to be presented in the metaphor. So how does that land? Does that make sense to because I want to check in here because I'm word vomiting a lot here. How does that land?
Word vomit's great. I love it. Yeah. I mean, maybe I'll just kind of say it back is contextual thinking is important. And, you know, when we're trying to make a good metaphor, when we say something like time is money, there needs to be something there that even though if you were to just evaluate this sentence logically and it would completely fail on the face of it, you go, no, those two things are not the same. And yet there is a context there in which our pattern matching brain goes, ooh, I want to find one and 1 + 1 could equal 3. And there's just enough there for you to try to figure out how. So I do like that on the contextual front. Going back to, you know, your drive and priming something important before you go, I think that's huge. You know, one of the questions I usually end on is, what advice do you have for folks? And I think that's massive advice right there. We spend so much of our time, those of us who don't spend time thinking about thinking, you spend time daydreaming without remembering any of it, right? You're just kind of lost in thought, but you can give a structure to that meandering thought. It can be very useful, but you've got to prime it first. And there is nothing better than a question. We love mysteries, right? We love unanswerable questions. And so to have a habit in this case where you prime yourself to consider that as you're on your commute or what have you, I think that's a wonderful habit that anyone could get into. And you're not really forcing yourself to think hard, although you probably end up will. You will end up doing so. So no, I think those both land quite well.
And it becomes, sorry, just to add on to that, it becomes, in addition to it becoming a focus, it becomes a filter. It becomes a filter to how you see the world and what you let in, and it shapes how that enters. So like I listen to nothing as I'm driving, but if I were to listen to a podcast and I had front loaded one of those questions and had primed my thinking to
filtering that whole podcast to me.
Yeah, because you might listen to a story very differently because you're connecting it to the problem that you're trying to solve, which would, again, it's okay to let your mind wander in that way because you're able to make connections that you wouldn't ever have made because you're primed the whole world. And every conversation that you have, every book that you read, every article that you consume, all of that is being filtered through those problems.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. So we're going to back up a little bit and zoom way out. This is usually the last question I like to ask. And that is because I think it's important to put your whole life in context. Let's contextualize our whole lives, your work and your passion and all those things. And, you know, the way that I like to do that is and it's a little dark, but you're at the end of your life and you're looking back on everything.
Yeah.
And my question is, what was the good life? You know, how do you ensure that you're and we all make mistakes and we're all humans, but what's going to feel right leaving this world going, I did a good thing. I don't have any serious regrets. If I could go back and redo everything, I think I would do it the same way without, obviously we'd probably maybe not buy as much crypto at some point but
right.
in the real meaningful aspect, as you're looking back, how do you know that you've lived a good life and you've done it right?
I think, you can you can measure success in any number of different ways. You can measure your success based on how comfortable of a life you might have lived. You can measure it by the impact that you've had on folks. I think for me, it's a matter of living a life where it's not that I'm just practicing what I preach, I'm practicing what I teach. It's this element of living in alignment, not just in my teaching, but just like how I'm showing up on a day-to-day basis outside of the classroom. And I hope that anyone that comes across my circle of influence, I guess, and by influence, I mean, in this case, I'm defining influence by just like something that I've done to maybe help someone else in their lives. And it could be a shallow interaction, or it could be a deep interaction. But anyone that comes across my circle of influence to have, at the end of it, had a positive sum gain from it. I think, like, at the end of the day, for me, a lot of what I've done, it's weird that, because I don't think I've touched on this at all in our conversation, but I think a lot of it boils down to people and community, which is a weird pivot out of all of this to make. But community, in the sense of however you want to think about it, it could be a small community, it could be a big community, but like having some kind of positive sum impact in the sphere that surrounds me, and however small or big that is, I think I would feel like I had lived a meaningful and fulfilling life if that were the case. And taken the other way, like, it would feel really bad if all I did was turtle and be completely like self-absorbed. So anyway, that's that. I'm not sure if that is in alignment with any of the other stuff that we've talked about, but because I don't think I touched on community at all. But I part of why, and in addition to why I started doing some of this, is that I wanted to have trivial and deep conversations with people outside of my current circle of influence.
Yeah.
So part of this is allowed that to happen as well. So yeah.
No, it's absolutely connected. One of the things I talk about on the podcast is that teaching and learning are social activities. And I can consume information. I can learn lots of stuff from courses, but there's a reason why most everyone prefers in-person class over virtual, right? Yes, it's very useful, and it can be efficient in a number of different ways and convenient, but we want to be around other people, and we want to be around other people in teaching and learning environments specifically. And I think, so your comments on community are very much in line with everything that you're doing, because what you've done is built this massive community around you that are now at minimum fans of visual metaphors and your work, but I suspect in many cases wanting to learn from you and be around other people who appreciate it and then implement those things in their lives. I know I'm going to try to do a better job of implementing visual metaphors in my own teaching and work. So for that. And my audience appreciates you for that. So thank you so much. And I just want to end on, where can people find you for that one person who doesn't know who you are and what you're up to? And I also, I don't know, you might not pitch it, but I would love to pitch it. I read it. You have courses, you've got programs. I just discovered this. I had no idea before I prepped for this. And now I'm like really excited and I'm ready. So where can people find out about those things?
So probably the best way to stay in touch is through LinkedIn and my newsletter. I have a visual ideas newsletter. That's where I share some of my favorite pieces that I've created. And yeah, those are probably the best places. If you're interested in leveling up your communication, I teach a cohort course called Thinking in Visual Metaphors. We've had 16 cohorts now, been doing it for the last 3 years. We've had over 700 students go through the program, which is wonderful. We've got almost 200 amazing testimonials that have been really just lovely. I like to tell folks, like, I don't cherry pick any of those. Those are not me picking any of them. They're like somebody puts it out there, it's up there. It's not like it's like Yelp or Google. You know, you see it, it's there. Whatever anyone says is there, and it's a lovely, lovely community. It's some of my favorite people online, and very generous and thoughtful folks who end up taking the course. I call it thinking in visual metaphors, and not like 10x your social media following for a very important reason, because I think anyone who's attracted to a course that's called thinking in visual metaphors, they're there for a very different reason than
you're gonna find the right people for that course.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So yeah, so those are probably the best places to stay in touch. And yeah, I just guess I would like to just leave one final note, which is regardless of whether or not you think you can draw or think you can't draw, like this may one of the elephants in the room that I address very often in both the course and in any of the stuff that I do that's connected to the creative arts, which is, one, creativity has many different manifestations. Anyone can be creative. And two, interestingly enough, I don't believe that you have to be able to draw to create visual metaphors, which is like a weird thing that people may be like, what? But I think that visual metaphors are really about the quality of your thinking and less about the quality of your illustrations. And sometimes, in fact, especially with, we haven't really gotten into this, but I will say just this last note, which is in a world of AI images where anything can look really pretty, but not very pithy, like doesn't really say anything. And look, you can get AI to make copies of other people's work. And, I see it all the time with my own work, and it is frustrating, but it doesn't improve the quality of your own thinking. Like, you can get AI to lift weights for you, I guess. But would you get stronger? Probably. Yeah, metaphorically. Yeah. But you're not going to get stronger in anything yourself. So I would encourage anyone out there who is feeling some level of, I feel like there's something else out there, like to explore that, to lean into that, to try the 1% version of whatever it is that you're thinking about. And there's so many ambient benefits of living a more creative life. So I'd encourage you to do so.
Well, you've convinced me. And thanks again, PJ, for coming on. This was a wonderful interview. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.